Joining me now to talk about that is the Front Bench panel. Former BC Premier Christy Clark, she's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former Toronto Mayor John Tory, and CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair. Thank you all for being here. Christy, I'm going to start with you on this. Canada joined the calls for a humanitarian corridor to be opened. Is there now a bigger role for Canada to play here?
I think Canada can continue to play a big role here for sure. I mean, this is who we are as Canadians, trying to make sure that we're supporting civilian populations who are the victims of war all around the world. I do think it's important to remember, though, we don't want to get involved in assigning blame yet in this particular circumstance at the hospital in Gaza. But I do think it's important for all Canadians to remember that Israel, an independent country recognized by the United Nations, has been invaded in the most barbarous way possible. And, I think we need to make sure that politicians in this country are continuing to support Israel, recognizing as well that the Palestinian people are governed by a government that is sponsored by Iran, on which they haven't had a chance to vote since 2006, and is supported only by a minority of the population. So I think the Prime Minister is right in saying we need to have sympathy for the Palestinian people who are governed by Hamas, and we also need to make sure that this war, and which is always a horrible thing, is something that Canadians can have a role in ameliorating the worst effects of.
Yeah, for sure. And Tom, on that humanitarian corridor, the U.S. State Department has said that they're going to use this as an opportunity to get their people out of the region. How crucial is it for Canada to follow suit and do the same?
We should be doing everything we can to do the same. That's one of our core obligations in terms of our international diplomacy, Mike, is to make sure that we're taking care of our citizens, especially in a difficult situation like this one. I think that Canada's offered to put in $10 million of humanitarian aid is welcome. When you look at the American $100 million, that's about proportionally right between our two countries, but of course a lot more can and should be done. 20 trucks isn't going to do a heck of a lot for a couple of million people, but it's a step in the right direction. I also think that Canadian diplomacy, to stay with that theme for a second, is really hard pressed right now. Yes, we do have a proud history of helping in these matters, and peacekeeping has been part of our identity for years. But on the international front, we've had a really tough month or so. India is now booting out Canadian diplomats. We've gone through the crisis last year with China. We went through the same thing with Saudi Arabia. We've got to start asking ourselves whether we're getting this right. And I think that there are too many examples where we've been getting it wrong. Let's hope that here we can step up to the plate. Melanie Joly has gone to Israel. Maybe we can play a positive role. We know that there's going to be a very tough time ahead. And we know when it's going to start, in the next little while, but there's no way to know how and when it's going to end. And that's what's terrible for everybody around the world right now.
John, to Tom's point there, is that why Canada will likely have to rely on the U.S. right now to do most of the heavy lifting?
Well, I think we often do. Look, let's call it the way it is, which is that it's a big deal at home for us here, in many different respects for many different communities, but we're not such a big deal over there. I think, as Tom said, we can play a useful role. I really think the government has handled this very well. I think the Prime Minister has been pitch perfect from day one when he was very careful to explain the difference to people between Hamas and the Palestinian people. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and he talked about that business that Christy referred to about an invasion that's happened that distinguishes this from just something else. I think that Melanie Joly being there is important, although I don't overestimate the importance of that, but it's important to Canada. I think us stepping up on the aid, we could probably step up, if you compare it to the military amounts that were allocated today, it's pretty small. So we maybe shouldn't wait for the United States to increase their number. And then the last thing I want to say, which no one else has yet, I think all of the politicians have done a pretty good job in Canada of not politicizing this. I think it actually has been a fairly measured kind of response on all sides, led by what the Prime Minister started to do. But Mr. Poilievre's been the same, and that isn't always the case.
Christy, I wanted to ask you, Justin Trudeau had the question put to him today if he would visit Israel. He was non-committal about it. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think what Tom said about the Prime Minister's international adventures not always being successful is a point that that he perhaps has absorbed. I'm not sure that he carries the weight that he carries a lot of weight when he travels. I think in this case, it's important for Canada to be there, to make sure that we are supporting Israel, to make sure that we are offering humanitarian aid where necessary. But I'm really not sure that the Prime Minister needs to be traveling anymore. And as Tom said, his international adventures of late have been not just unsuccessful, but in some case pretty disastrous. I'm not sure I'm not sure he's going to contribute to a large scale, kind of a large scale sort of stabilization of the region when he gets there. If he goes.
Tom, what do you think? Do you think that he could sort of undo some of that harm that he has had in the last month by making a trip there?
I think that if we wound up with a procession of Western leaders, whether it be Canada or France or Germany, I don't think that would be particularly helpful this time. The key visit was from Biden. He had some important messages. It was an incredible situation to hear an American president admit that the United States had made mistakes because they lashed out in anger after 11. He gave specific examples of Afghanistan, Iraq, and of course Libya. So that was an important moment, but he was trying to talk to the world and saying, this is what you have to be careful of. You can react in a way that gives you certain satisfaction because you're lashing out against the people who attacked your country in the most horrific terrorist attacks imaginable. But if you don't know what the game plan is after that, you could wind up with no exit strategy, to use a classic phrase. And to build on something that Christy said at the outset, Mike, I'd say that it wasn't just a couple of weeks ago that Israel was attacked. Israel was invaded in 1948, the day it was recognized by the United Nations. All of its neighbors attacked. And ever since, we went through the Suez Crisis, we went through the Six-Day War in 1967, we went through the Yom Kippur War in 1978. Israel knows how to meet an existential threat. And Hamas has become an existential threat. And anybody who had any doubt that Hamas exists to kill Jews has to only look at what they actually did. Their purpose, their stated purpose is to destroy the state of Israel and to kill Jews. And so when you hear people here in Canada in marches sometimes saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, what are they saying? And that's worth thinking about it, because what they're saying is that from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, Israel shouldn't be there. And that's what Iran's key message is, too. So I think that if we're going to look at this fairly, we, have to do everything we can to help the civilian population in Gaza and otherwise the Palestinian people work towards a two-state solution. Absolutely. But let's not forget what this is about existentially for Israel since the day it was created and recognized by the United Nations.
John, I can give you about 20 seconds to end off here, but do you think that Canada should be playing more of a role, but more from Canada, more from our shores over here, as Christy and Tom have been saying?
The minister's over there. She'll do a fine job representing us. The Prime Minister should stay here. And I think over time it's going to get more difficult to continue to manage the issue as, as we keep hearing the hostilities are going to be stepped up. Look, if you look at what President Biden did that was most useful, it was to go and meet with the War Cabinet and convince them that there should be some humanitarian channel opened up. And I don't think that's going to happen with our Prime Minister, no disrespect. And so I think he should stay here and manage what could be a more difficult issue as time goes on, and let the minister be over there if Canada needs to have somebody over there.